part of it is that it is like a forgetting of yourself. You're fully absorbed. You feel at one with what you're doing, that you almost lose sense of time and you forget yourself and you become one with what you're doing.
What does a flow state look like to you? Like, how do you feel in your studio? When does it come? How does it, work?
Yeah. Well, if I think back to the most memorable flow experiences, part of it is that it is like a forgetting of yourself. You're fully absorbed. You feel at one with what you're doing, that you almost lose sense of time and you forget yourself and you become one with what you're doing. For me, it usually comes about by surprise when I've reached a point in the creative process where like maybe a number of the initial steps have been done. So I've been sketching, and I'm painting, but there's still like that right balance of challenge that you can't like completely zone out. Like sometimes I'll paint murals and the design's done and I'm just filling in the outlines, and that I can listen to an audiobook and kind of disengage. But it's in those moments where like you're actively figuring something out. So maybe like painting a gradient, painting something I've never painted before, or doing life drawing where I'm observing a model and I'm trying to represent it accurately, and it requires looking and translating and drawing, and you have to be like really in it. So you're really, there's that effortlessness, but you're still engaged. So it might happen if I'm designing a poster or doing a painting, but it's different to, when you're scrolling on your phone and you're completely escaping, but you don't feel like you have like a sense of agency or control. And a lot of the like writings about it describe it so beautifully as this like cascading of like learning or like doing better than you expected. And it's almost like it could be seen as a positive, like flourishing state. Even just the other night, like, I don't know if I was in flow state, but it was the first time in a long time where I stayed up really late into the night. I was drawing these letter forms for a calligraphy project I'm working on. And I was just sitting there drawing like just with a pencil. And it was really simple. But there was something about it that felt the closest in a long time to being actively, I don't know, really engaged with it. There were no distractions. That's another thing. Like, if you get distracted, it can interrupt that. And I think that feeling of being focused now is so sought after because it's just so easy to be distracted that you've got to create the conditions for it to like come about naturally. And that may be more challenging than we know.
Okay. Oh, that's quite interesting. And based on that, what you said, do you ever feel bored doing what you do? Like, do you have maybe client projects that are not so stimulating, maybe something else?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, a few years ago when I had this like, moment of like figuring out like what was the next phase of my career and what I needed to be stimulated, I think I was quite unaccepting of the boring parts of my job. And I was a bit like, and I'm like, this is supposed to be my passion. Like everything should be fun. And it's, but the reality is to live a creative life is such a luxury. So to have things like liaising with clients and emails and doing admin, or even in the creative process itself, like round one of coming up with an idea, I'm very actively engaged because it's open, you're seeking inspiration, you're coming up with sketches and mock-ups, you're sharing it. Then there's like the in-between phase where it's often like small tweaks or color changes, and those bits can be boring. And so yes, it's 100% a part of it, but I think I've made peace with that and just know that that's everything in life. If it was all sunshine and daisies, you wouldn't have any contrast. Really getting good at those boring parts or like finding ways to do them is like part of the creative expertise. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I do see it, and there is, as you said, especially the admin work and paperwork and all the things. It's not always interesting. Well, most of the time it's not interesting, but we have
Yeah.
to do it, and
Yeah.
it's a part of the job. Um, is that one of the reasons why you work on so many different things?
Yeah, I think it's possible. As I said before, like when I'm studying, I find it easier then to shift back to creative work because, I mean, even just using different parts of my body, like I'm a very bodily person when I think about my practice. It's part of the reason I started doing murals. But I noticed that, like, if I were to get into like a real block of creative work that was very heavily computer focused. Like it was just ergonomically like one thing. So if I could get outside and read an article, then I would be able to walk and sit in the park and read a paper or do admin on my computer or at a park bench and then come back and paint or maybe do calligraphy. And it was the shifting between all of these different things that allowed me to feel like very physically alive and not to get bored and stagnant and to also really focus on the thing that I'm doing at the time. Because what I also started to realize was that it's very easy to get lost in a design process that's not quite flow state, but could just be like tinkering with no real progression.
Yeah, yeah.
And that by putting a time pressure, whether it was like a 45-minute or 90-minute window, actually allowed me to do really precise work, come up with a solution, and then come back with fresh eyes and not overcook something.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a working strategy. But I see other artists who just hone in on one thing, and there's a part of me that's like, oh, what if I just did that? But I know my personality now, and I do love to have like a harmony of things happening at once. So I'm going to continue down this path and see where it goes. But I'm definitely not introducing anything new for a while. I think I've got a lot to juggle and to just bring them
Okay.
all up together as one.